Bore da pawb, croeso cynnes i'r webinar Nadolig o'r Fforwm Seilwaith Werdd Cymru. Welcome everyone, very warm welcome to the Christmas webinar of the Wales Green Infrastructure Forum. And as you can see, I'm not in Wales at the moment, I'm in Ulas in Finland. Well, not really, but I just thought I'd try and get us into the Christmas spirit on a kind of a rather damp day in Llanberis in North Wales. We're very, very privileged today to have with us Dr. Lena Chan, who's the architect of the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity. Singapore, Lena will tell us more about the history, but basically Singapore has been the world leader in assessing cities biodiversity. And I met Lena at a conference, I think it was last year, wasn't it, Lena, in Paris?
Yes, that's right.
An international index. And I thought Wales has declared a biodiversity emergency, and we're doing all we can to promote biodiversity in Wales and in our urban areas. So I thought, what better way to end what's been a very crazy year than with hearing from one of the world's experts on the conservation of biodiversity in cities. The way this is going to work is I'm going to shut up in a minute, and then I'm going to pass over to Dr. Chan, who will talk for 20 minutes. And after that, we'll take questions. I'll be recording this webinar, and at the end of the webinar, if everybody's happy, I'll put the recording on our YouTube channel so you can refer back to it later. And I know there are a lot of members who couldn't make it to this meeting, so they will be able to see the webinar as well. I'm going to keep you all muted, I'm afraid, until question time. And then please turn on your chat function, which you should see, I think, well, on a Mac anyway, it's at the bottom of the screen. Click on that and you should get the option to put a message. And so put your question in there, and I will then go round and ask you to actually speak your question to Dr. Chan when she's finished speaking. If anybody's got any questions about how this is going to work, then please type something into the chat right now. Otherwise, I'm going to start the webinar. So just looking at my chat screen, nobody's saying anything. I am now going to pass you over to Dr. Lena Chan to talk about the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity. Lena, over to you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Pete. It's I'm really honored that you've invited me, and I'm glad that we have participants from Wales. I like Wales. I've been there before. And in fact, I have a cousin living in Cardiff, so it's a great place. Now, let me just start off by introducing you to the Singapore Index, and basically start off by asking, why do we need an index for measuring biodiversity and biodiversity efforts of cities? I think the key thing is, very few people realize that biodiversity exists in cities, and they think cities are just devoid of biodiversity. It's not true. We've got lots of biodiversity, and an important thing is biodiversity don't depend on human beings. If we go, biodiversity can still thrive, but our quality of life, our survival depend on biodiversity. In fact, in 2010, there is this publication by the Secretary of the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, called Cities and Biodiversity Outlook. And it basically wants to show the linkages between urbanization, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. I'm just going to highlight some of the messages that was actually projected in this book, or shared in this particular document. The 10 messages, but I'm going to highlight five of them. Sorry. First, rich biodiversity can exist in cities. And second, biodiversity and ecosystem services are critical natural capital. I think people now are hearing a lot about natural capital. And more importantly, biodiversity actually contributes to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And I think people realize that climate change is not a figment of anybody's imagination. It's for real. And COVID-19 has shown that when all our transport systems and food delivery system disappears, people living in cities need to get hold of food. So biodiversity in urban food systems are actually very important. But how do we do it? We need to integrate it in urban policy and planning. It should not be done in isolation. So what is the Singapore Index? It's not an index just for Singapore, and I'll show you later how many cities have done it. It is a tool that the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Singapore government came up with this initiative to develop a tool to help cities evaluate or monitor their biodiversity conservation efforts. And what we did was that we figured that it's important that it's a self-assessment tool. So it's not something where it's a bit like your report card, you don't want to go and compare, well, how did my neighbor do? Well, you do. But on the other hand, you want to know how well you have done over the years. So it's a this self-assessment tool showing how you have improved. Now, if it is a self-assessment tool, it must be easy to apply because we are asking city councils, municipalities to actually apply it on the city. But what's the point of having something that's easy to apply, but it is not scientifically credible? So we want it to be very robust and scientifically sound, credible. At the same time, because many cities are going to apply this tool, it has to be objective and fair. And the reason why we say that is because we can't have an indicator that says we want it scored. We don't want it to be such that a city in a tropical area is going to have, just by virtue of its location, be much, much more biodiversity diverse than more richer in biodiversity than one in the Arctic or in a temperate country. So we need to then say, hey, based it on what you have, how has your biodiversity improved or not improved? Therefore, it's got to be objective and fair. So the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, I'm going to say it's a mouthful, the CBD then led a collaboration with the Global Partnership on Local and Subnational Action for Biodiversity. So in 2008, Singapore proposed at the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD in Bonn that we were going to actually initiate this, lead this. And we then, got together experts from all around the world. And it was important that we have a diversity of experts. And hence, the CBD at the 10th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD, they endorsed the Singapore Index in 2010. We had held 4 expert workshops. So shortly after the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2008, in February, we already initiated the first expert workshop. And then we went back, developed it further, clean up the indicators and had a second meeting in 2010 and then fine-tune it in 2011. And last year was the 10th anniversary of the Singapore Index, where we felt that it's time to actually go back and revisit it and see what we can do better. In the meantime, we had held several workshops, ASEAN workshops, in April 2010 for 19 cities and in June 2014 for 16 cities. So as a result of the last workshop that was held in October 2019, we came up with these revised indicators. So now, let me also share with you that when we first developed this index, we were all figuring out how do we want to measure, how do we want to show the improvement, or how have we actually progressed over the years, this biodiversity conservation. So we felt that we had to select indicators. And the other important thing is the indicators, we can't have like hundreds of indicators because it will be so daunting. And we didn't want like 5 or 10 because it will not actually be very robust. Therefore, we felt that around 20 to 30 indicators would be good. And we all agreed that there should be a quantitative measurement. So which means that there's a quantitative score. And some experts actually felt that why don't we have the traffic light system, which most indicators or indices use? If you have green, it means, you've improved. Red, you've done worse. And amber, which means that you're remaining status quo. We felt very strongly that if you cannot measure something, you can't be objective about it. It's a gut feeling, so people would disagree. But if it is a quantitative measurement, you can't disagree, or you then say, I disagree, but let me show you how I calculated. And there is some common basis of discussion. So that was what we felt. We wanted a quantitative measurement. So we allocated 4 points each. The reason why historical, because the first time we developed this indicator, we had 25 indicators. So 25, 4 points each. It was a nice 100 points kind of an index. But as time went on, we felt that it was not realistic. So we kept to the 4 points, but the number of indicators changed. So I will quickly run through with you the indicators. Now, I don't have the time in 20 minutes to actually talk about all these indicators in detail, but we'll be happy to share with you a draft copy of this revised version of the Singapore Index. And we can also share with you a user's manual for the current Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity, so that you can actually compare the two. So now, first of all, the Singapore Index is divided into 3 categories. First, we want to measure what native biodiversity you have in your city. And the second is, what if you've got native biodiversity in the city, what ecosystem services do they provide? And third, if you have good biodiversity which provide ecosystem services, what governance, how do you actually look after it? What rules and regulations? How do you actually spread the message? So those are the 3 main categories, and each of them would have different indicators. So very quickly, the indicators for the first category of what native biodiversity in the city comprises these indicators. What proportion of natural areas do you have in the city? Very important, in cities, natural areas are fragmented. So we want to connect them by various kind of connective measures or ecological networks to counter fragmentation. But what is important is that there are many biodiversity in built-up areas. If you look around, you find that the most common one are birds, and then you have various kinds of insects, lizards, various things. And now we're beginning to see even mammals coming in. In your case, you probably see foxes. In our case, we've seen otters, we've seen various kinds of animals coming up. Now then, the next thing is we wanted to find out what is the change in number of vascular plants in the city. Now, we didn't want absolute value, because if we have absolute values, then what you end up doing is that temperate countries are naturally going to have less number of vascular plants. So that's why we felt that we wanted to measure whether over time, have you done anything to bring back extinct species or very highly threatened species. Similarly, these are the three main taxonomic groups: vascular plants, native bird species, and native arthropod species. Next thing, it is inevitable that in cities, natural ecosystems are degraded or have gone, they need a little bit of a push. So we feel that habitat restoration is extremely important. In fact, the world community recognizes it. So that is why next year onwards, in 2021 to 2030, UN has designated a decade, that to be a decade for ecosystem restoration. Now, the next thing is, out of the proportion of natural areas, we also want to know how much of it is legally protected. So that is why we felt that proportion of protected natural areas was important. And one of the major threats of species extinction or biodiversity conservation are actually invasive alien species. So the 9 indicators here allocate 4 points each. Now I'm going to quickly run through the rest because I think I'm already hitting 20 minutes. So the ecosystem services provided by biodiversity are regulation of quantity of water. So the permeability is very important. And what's the climate regulation, the benefits of trees and greenery, recreational services provided by biodiversity, health and well-being, very important, accessibility to parks. In particularly during the lockdown of COVID-19 in Singapore, all our parks were open and people needed to go to these natural areas to rejuvenate, to be in the outdoors, to reconnect with nature. It was absolutely essential for our sanity. And very important too is urban agriculture. And so that's 5 indicators for ecosystem services. Now we have a long list for governance and management of biodiversity because that's extremely important. We have an indicator for institutional capacity, what budget is allocated to biodiversity, and the different kinds of policy, rules, and regulations. Do you have a local biodiversity strategy and action plan? Does a city have or has started to actually assess their natural capital? If you don't assess your natural capital, you won't know the value of it. So that's very important. A recognition of the importance of biodiversity as our natural capital. What is the state of our green and blue space management plans in the city? That's also very important. Do you have a plan? Do you have a management plan? And have you come up with any responses to climate change? Are there any policy or incentives for green infrastructure as nature-based solutions? This is a green infrastructure forum, so that's important. And like all ecology, where there are interlinkages of different organisms, similarly, we should work the same way. We should learn from nature. So cross-sectorial and interagency collaborations are very important. We can't work in silo. We also need to have participation and partnership. So the existence of formal and informal public consultation pertaining to biodiversity related matters are very important. And we find that the more number of agencies and private sector, academics, people, everything, that the city is partnering in biodiversity activities, projects, and programs, the more robust it is, the more successful it is, and the less money you have to use, because there are more and more people contributing, whether it's their services or their time or their funds. So it's not one person alone, as they say, we are in this together, you know. So the number of biodiversity projects implemented by the city annually is also an indication of a city's commitment to biodiversity. Education, is it in the formal education process? Is it in the school curriculum? Awareness, are there any public awareness program? And very important, you want people to actually do it hands-on. Community science, they've got to be partake in it, because if they don't interact and contribute, they are not stakeholders. You want participation. So based on this, we have several, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, it's about 16, I think. So it's 56 points for that, yeah. So now,
Lena, can I
just to show
just
you,
say that we're starting to run out of time.
okay, very quickly, I'll run through the next few slides very quickly. This shows you the 36 cities that have applied the index. 40 cities have actually been applied by academics and cities that are doing it. This is a map showing it. And the importance of it is it's comprehensive, and it's, I've mentioned it before, it's aspirational, engage diverse stakeholders and multiple applications. And I've already stated that, and we are actually showing the role of the Singapore Index in the monitoring of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So the question that I want you to think about is, what can you do to make biodiversity thrive better in your city? Thank you. Thanks, Pete, for the indulgence of letting me stretch on for a few minutes. Thank you.
Lena, actually, you brought it in very close to time indeed. We spent a bit of time at the start introducing things. I wonder, before we go into questions, could you just flip back to the map and just show us again how many cities are involved with this? Because I know there are a lot of people here from local government, and something that's quite important for local government is that they need to know that they're not doing this alone. So it looks like you've got a lot of cities across the world there that are working on this.
Exactly. Now, can I just very quickly share with you, the cities in Canada are Edmonton and Montreal, yeah, and then we have San Francisco, LA in United States. We have 2 cities in Mexico, and we have cities in South America. We have several European cities, and we have India, quite a few cities in India, quite a few cities in Japan. Japan might not use the entire, all the indicators, but they selected something that were applicable to them. So all these cities, the ASEAN cities, there are several ASEAN cities, and New Zealand too, there are quite a few cities. Now, there are many more cities that have applied, but it's just that they didn't let us know. So what we have, we just found it sometimes quite by surprise that this city is applied, but oh, really? Yeah, thank you very much. Would you like to share with us your report? So it's great that you hear about it in a forum, in a webinar. So when you apply it, please let Pete and ourselves know, and we'll be more than happy to help you along. And I think that's where we're coming from. Yeah. So we'll be happy to share with you this PDF version of the PowerPoint so that you can see for yourself the diverse range of cities. Edinburgh has applied, as well as London. Yeah.
So Los Angeles, London, fairly small places that some of our members might have heard about.
Yes, yes. You must have heard about, well, Brussels. Brussels not very popular, but never mind, with this current situation, yes. Curitiba, one of the early ones, then Sao Paulo. As I said, Edmonton and Montreal.
So Sao Paulo is the third, well, the last time
Brazil.
I looked, the third largest city in the world.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so quite amazing. And wonderful city in Spain, Victoria-Gasteiz. So fantastic.
I had the privilege to speak to Vitoria-Gasteiz when they were in the run-up to the European Green Capital.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, and I'm guessing that Rodrigo Victor had something to do with the Sao Paulo.
Yes. So
that's wonderful. Yeah. I know that in Swansea they're looking at using a green space factor for the redevelopment of their city centre.
Yes.
Here we go. We've got a question here from Marie. There we go. Asking if we can share the presentation. I will definitely do that. There's an issue with the Natural Resources Wales website at the moment uploading PDFs. So what I will do is I will ask anybody that wants Lena's presentation to email me, and I will email it back to you.
Actually, sorry, Pete, can I maybe just suggest, because instead of going two ways, if you don't mind, Pete, I'll be happy to actually share my email, and you can just drop me an email, anybody who wants the PDF version, and I'm happy to share my email. I'm going to put it in the chat. If I can't, one of my colleagues, I think Jeremy is with us, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, there's several of my colleagues. There's Fairuz, there's Hassan, Jeremy. So you see, they're all so good. They're all they're afraid that there's no one, so they all appear. So excellent. So they just, can one of you, either Jeremy, write in the chat and give them write my email, right? And anybody can send it to me, and we'll be happy to actually.
I can see that on the chat now, Lena. We've had a question about what was the catalyst for the biodiversity index. I think you spoke about that at the start, but we've got one of our members would like to hear more about what prompted you to create it.
Well, you see, the CBD was ratified in 1993, 94. And for years, we were all talking about, let's implement the CBD. But it took a long time. There was a lot of talking. So now, then the logical question would be, what is the most effective level of actually implementing anything? And honestly, the city level, because the people living in cities are the ones who, because of their density and because they are most vocal, they would then say, hey, we want a better environment. You